Here we go with some notes on cellular respiration, and this is in Chapter 6 in your textbook. I encourage you to open that up and check out the additional pictures and embedded videos. It will really help you understand this concept. Don't focus just on filling in blanks on these slides, but I'm going to add some additional things to the notes, and I encourage you to also do so. Think of this as your script. If you are going to be an actor, you're given all your lines and told to have it down by a certain date so that you could be at the movie set and do your job. So that's an analogy to here's your script for our last quiz of this first semester, and this is 1/3 of what the test is going to be. The next test is on cell membranes, which we've had. Here's cellular respiration, and this is with the mitochondria. This packet of notes also has at the very second part of it, it's got photosynthesis. So that's why there's a picture right here of photosynthesis and also the mitochondria. These are the energy organelles. Both plants and animals have mitochondria, but only plants have a chloroplast. It turns out that they make their own food. The food that they make is glucose. They also give off a waste gas called oxygen, but what they give away, we take. That's why the arrow is going this way. So for cellular respiration, the chemical formula is, the reactants are glucose, and oxygen. When they make ATP from glucose and oxygen, they are throwing things away. The carbon dioxide in water right there is a waste byproduct for them. And we exhale that, and the water gets breathed out as well or evaporated. And that's exactly what plants need to make glucose. So you can see the relationship between plants and animals. Over here is a picture of a battery that is low on energy at the top, called ADP. And then the one at the bottom is ATP, and this is what a charged up battery is, ATP. I'm going to draw a line down the middle of a battery. Inside of a battery, there are two compartments separated, and they're semi-permeable. And so this is where there's a barrier that you could pile up a lot of stuff on one side. A battery has a positive side and a negative side. So on the negative side, it has a lot of electrons. On the positive side, it has very few electrons. That's a concentration gradient. If it is a dead battery, it's pretty much even. You know, they're all spread out. But over here on a charged up battery, on this side, there's a lot of negatives. And over here, very little. So now if you hook up a wire from one side of this battery to the other, there's going to be a flow. Go with the flow is diffusion, area of high concentration to low concentration. So these electrons would be zipping down this way and making their way to the other side, to the point where they would reach equilibrium like an ADP. On another slide, we're going to talk about how the molecule of ATP, that is the end goal. It is the power molecule of all life, both plants and animals. We're built alike. It's pretty neat. And so we'll get to more on ATP on another slide. Since life requires energy, it's one of the characteristics of living thing that they obtain and use energy. Plants obtain their own energy by photosynthesis, making their own food. Animals have to eat plants or eat animals that ate the plants. So that is our source of potential energy in the food that we eat, or the organic molecule, and what the cells can use for doing things inside the cell. They don't use glucose, they use ATP. So we're trying to get at ATP here. Here's a video that's embedded in the textbook. It's really good for you to look at that. Let's start at the bottom of the screen here. Glucose and oxygen are needed. These are on the left side, and these are called reactants. And at the end, these are called products right here. So good idea for you to write that down. So we're trying to get at ATP. That's the main product. It's going to throw these away because they are a byproduct. They're inconsequential for the end result, which was to produce ATP. And so is heat. Heat is generated when you are breaking apart molecules. So this glucose right here, it has a carbon at each one of the corners. And this line right here represents a covalent bond. And a covalent bond, you might recall, is a sharing of 2 electrons. So I put 2 dots right there. Between each of these are 2 dots. That's what a covalent bond is. It's sharing of electrons. Called a Lewis dot chemical formula. Structural way of writing a molecule, either with lines or with dots. The lines represent 2 electrons. So what we're going to get at are these electrons. So the mitochondria is going to split this here, here, and here, here, and then get all those electrons, and it's going to use the power of electricity. That's what electricity is, flowing electrons. And it is going to use that power in the glucose to create the ATP. This term right here, exergonic, is energy releasing. The opposite is endergonic. Moving on to life's energy molecule, the ATP. It is shown again here from the first slide. ADP is the energy poor molecule. ATP is the energy rich molecule. And where is that extra energy coming from? I'm going to have you circle this. It's between the second and third phosphate. It's the bond between the second and the third phosphate, and that happens to be right there. So we already showed that these lines are covalent bonds and they're sharing electrons. Draw 2 dots for electrons, and these are electrons. And so if this phosphate is going to bond with that one, it is going to add 2 electrons in there. So that's a covalent bond. This diagram that you see here with all the question marks comes from chapter 6, and there are interactive diagrams where you're going to move these into the right place. So that was chapter 6. Check it out. I think it's like page 3. And then it is going to make pyruvate, and this is going to be 2 ATP right there. So I could finish writing that, but if you go to the next page, it's got the answers. So you need to know what these are. It is nothing more than the chemical reaction that we saw. Let me slide back here, right here. It is this chemical reaction, and when you see 3 lines instead of 1 big long line, which means yields, that means that there's many extra chemical reactions, but this is the summary of all of them. So you would say glucose plus oxygen yields carbon dioxide and water and energy, and also some heat. So now, how do we get at those things. So we saw glucose, and we saw oxygen, and water, and carbon dioxide, and energy. So we're going to go through 3 steps. They're all labeled right here. So let me clear this up. I'm going to draw some new lines. The first step here, it is labeled as number 1. I'm going to circle all of this. This is glycolysis. Step number 2 is all of that. And then step number 3 is right here. It's a domino. One has to do its job. Tip step number 2. In other words, it's providing something to number 2. Like a domino actually has to hit the second domino. And what is coming in contact from 1 to 2, it's right here, pyruvate. That's going to go to step number 2. What's going to go to step number 3? What lines go to step number 3? If you look, you can see that there is a train track at the very top right here, and it is showing it going in this direction. So there are going to be electrons that flow from glucose and then make its way also to step number 3. There's also going to be electrons that leave here and then head over to there. And more electrons that are right here and flowing up and over. So the yellow lines connect that third domino of electron transport chain. Now we're going to go over slides for each one of these steps. So know kind of what goes into each step and what comes out of each step. I really recommend that you have a study partner, maybe a study group that can meet in the library or after school. If you don't have people that are at modern day, then maybe somebody at home that you could tutor this to. So then you become the teacher, so to speak. If you want to be an A student, you reach a level that you could teach it to somebody else. And if you're good at it, you could also earn campus ministry hours, direct service hours, tutoring another student. So it makes you a better student if you are tutoring others because you study up to a level that you really know it. And then you go into every quiz and test with full confidence because you're well practiced. You've got your script and you could talk. So the other way, if you don't have a person to talk to, you have to talk to yourself. Just like I'm doing right now, swipe down the top right-hand corner, hit record, make sure the volume is turned on, and do the voiceover to this picture right here. You should be able to talk for 5 to 10 minutes solid about what's happening with no script. So study your lines and then understand it. Go to the textbook. There's more videos that you can watch. You could always go to YouTube. You could always Google this and find more information. So if you want to be an A student, you've got the tools. But you do have to work it. So that's your homework, is understanding and not just filling in the blanks. So stage number 1, it's called glycolysis because it is going to act on glucose. So it's got the word glyco for glucose, and that is sweet because it is a sugar. Sugar is a carbohydrate. And the root word lyse means to split. So I'm going to have you do this. Type in 6 carbons in a row right here. That's glucose. It's usually not spread out in a line. It's usually a ring. But it is going to cut glucose right down the middle. So what comes out of glycolysis is right here. It's called pyruvate. So one of these is called pyruvate. And there's 2 of them. So that's the name of a 3-carbon long small molecule, pyruvate. So you've got 2 of them going into step number 2 there. Now, we're just going to look at the output here. It makes 2 ATPs, but really it costs 2 ATPs going in and then it made 4 ATP, and so it nets 2. That's what it means by net. You just do the math. It created 4, but it took 2 to start, so doing the math, that's 2. So when you see the word net, that means do all the math, and what's your answer? So that's a pretty simple beginning to cellular respiration, is the term for all 3 steps. The first step, glycolysis, it made 2 ATP, but what it did specifically is it brought some electrons up to that upper highway, and it's sending them to the electron transport chain, which has a fancy name called phosphorylation, because if you add a phosphate onto ADP, you have just phosphorylated. And oxygen is necessary in this too. That's why we breathe oxygen. So we'll get to that story. So step number 2, we are picking up where we left off. We received 2 pyruvates from glycolysis. We're sending them in. Here they are. Here are the pyruvates. There's 2 of them. And they're going to basically be what is coming into this cycle right here. It's a wheel, so it constantly rolls and moves as long as you have things coming into it. The main purpose of this stage right here is to create a lot of electrons. So remember this diagram that I was showing you right here? When you broke that, you released 2 electrons, and that's where they are right there. So the electrons get stripped out of the covalent bond and set free, actually put into a molecule called an electron carrier, and then sent over to the electron transport chain. But we're going to keep breaking apart pyruvate. So we're going to break it apart here, we're going to break it apart there, and the same thing with that one. So each yellow dot is a covalent bond. 2 electrons are going to be set free, and they're going to be set free right here. Now they have them in blue. So these electrons are the ones that are going to be shown heading down over here. It was a little bit there, but it's also like right in here. So all these white lines are where the electrons are going to flow, and they're heading over here. So that's a main purpose, is to strip out the electrons. So it only wanted the electrons right here, and it's going to take this carbon and add an oxygen to it and throw it away. We exhale it. We're going to exhale that one. We're going to exhale that one. So you are exhaling the pieces that glucose was made out of, carbon, and you're just keeping the electrons. So that's interesting. Here it is. It's throwing away the carbon. It grabbed the electrons, holding 2 of them together, sent it down right here, but it is throwing out carbon dioxide as a waste gas. So that's what it says right there. It only makes 2 ATPs. The reason why it said just 1 is because there are 2 pyruvates. This thing has to go around 2 times. All right, we're keeping it simple. Moving on to the next stage, called the Electron Transport Chain. So the goal of the ETC, I'll abbreviate that as ETC, the Electron Transport Chain, and it received a lot of electrons through molecules that were like shuttles, like a bus or Uber and Lyft or a taxi, and they were transported there. Then those taxis are empty, and they'll go back and pick up more electrons from glycolysis and the Krebs cycle once again, and just keep the cycle going. So here's the deets. Here are the details. Understand what we're looking at. the mitochondria, it's like this, and it has a squiggly inner membrane. It has an inner membrane and an outer membrane. Here is the outer membrane, and this one is called the inside membrane. You know that this one is the outside because it says the word cytoplasm right up there. And then this matrix is the very inside. So that's up here at the top. The matrix is this inner part right inside of that space wrapped up by the inner membrane. So you can see that the Krebs cycle happens right here in the matrix. Glycolysis happens outside in the cytoplasm. So I'll write glycolysis happens in the cytoplasm. Step 2 that we just finished, the Krebs cycle is in the matrix, but the electron transport chain, it's in and through the inner membrane of the mitochondria. We're going to go through 4 steps. Right now I'm just kind of making a little bit of room to do a little bit more sketching. And I'm going to follow a color pattern. I recommend that you do the same. Step number 1 right here. Electrons are dropped off at the inner membrane. Here they are, number 1 and number 1. These yellow boxes, NADH and FADH2, those are the electron carriers. And they have their very famous passengers, the electrons. I'm going to circle it. It had 2 electrons there, and 2 electrons are dropped off right there. They've even calculated how many electron carriers are coming and how many electrons are coming from each glucose molecule. You don't need to know that. We've got the big overview. We split apart glucose in glycolysis and Krebs cycle to get at the electrons in the bonds holding the carbons. We threw away the carbons and we grabbed those valuable electrons, carried them over to the electron transport chain, which is the inside membrane of the mitochondria. And they are going to flow down that membrane that they were dropped off at. So now I'm going to change colors, and we're going to go to red. Circling step number 2. Now I'm going to draw a red line. It has a starting place and an ending place where these electrons are flowing. This is electricity, just like going down a wire. What can electricity do? It can be put to work. The work that it's going to do for the mitochondria is active transport. Recall that active transport is moving molecules from where there's low concentration to an area that already has a lot of concentration, low to high concentration. Take a look at this. Down in the matrix, it says that there's a low concentration of hydrogens. So you can see a few of them sitting around. And up here in the pink space, it says high concentration. So that would mean that there are more up here. Now in nature, things would go the other way. They would go diffusion from high to low. But the electricity flowing here in stage 2, this flow of electrons in this direction, these electrons are electricity. It is going to provide the power to actively pump hydrogens from this space up into the inner membrane space. So that's what you see right here. So these have already been pumped up here with the movement of electrons flowing through. These are proteins and chemical reactions are happening here to pass the electron off like a hot potato from one molecule to the next. That's how they can move. And they are providing the energy that ATP normally would in an active transport pump. There's no ATP being used here. It's the energy from the flowing electricity. That was step number 2. And we talked about a battery early on, so now this is a fully charged battery. We are now going to step number 3, and I will now put that one in purple. I think pink is the closest I can get right now. So number 3, we've created a battery. What is a battery? A bunch of potential energy caused by massive amounts of ions on one side of a barrier. What's the barrier? The membrane itself. So in blue here in the matrix, it's low concentration of hydrogen, and the pink intermembrane space has got full amounts of hydrogen ions. It's a very charged up battery. What are we going to do with that? Just like Hoover Dam is holding back a lake, Big Bear Lake is held back by a dam. If you open up the dam, water flows through. It can turn a wheel called a turbine, and that can generate electricity. We're going to do the same thing right here. The energy producing wheel, it is called ATP synthase. A very good name for it because it's going to synthesize ATP. How does it do that? It makes ATP, which is 3 phosphates from 2 phosphates when you add a 3rd phosphate. Where does it get the energy in order to make that bond? With the flow of hydrogens. Open up this protein facilitated diffusion. It's going from high concentration to low concentration. And when it does, this guy spins in a circle. And the kinetic energy of this protein spinning is going to provide the energy to add that phosphate to make ATP. And it's going to make 32 ATPs. So that was step number 3. That is making ATP from the charged up intermembrane space. All right, recall that the electricity was flowing in step number 2, and the electrons were piling up on the floor. They're piling up on the matrix. So I'm going to point you in that direction right here, this line. This is where you have all these electrons, which are piling up down over here with nowhere to go. Free-flowing electrons are very dangerous for a cell. They're called free radicals. They need to be soaked up like with a sponge or a mop. And what is going to do that job? Number 4. It's going to make water in the process, so I'm going to use blue, which is for making water. Where is water made? Right here. How do we make water? Right here with the oxygen that we breathe. This is the reason why we breathe oxygen, so that it can get inside the matrix of the mitochondria and be available to combine with hydrogen, oxygen, and we need these electrons too. So all 3 of those are going to make water. That cleans up the mess. And how elegant that the cell is 75% water, so it really would like to have water. And there is a few organisms, even small mice, that can survive by making their own water when they make energy. They don't have to drink water because we even make water, but we're so large with our trillions of cells that we need more water than we can produce by our mitochondria. But that was it. That was the electron transport chain. Now, last up is this topic about fermentation. Fermentation's job is to keep making energy in the absence of oxygen. It resets glycolysis so glycolysis can work again. There are 2 forms. Animals like us, we go through lactic acid fermentation, and we produce lactate, which is a burning feeling in your muscles. If you work out too fast without breathing properly, you are in an anaerobic situation. I ran out of room to write the word anaerobic. Anaerobic respiration is keeping energy production in the absence of oxygen. So that was right there on the screen. Fermentation doesn't require oxygen. Hey, what else doesn't require oxygen? Looking right up here. Step 3, this required oxygen. So if you don't have oxygen, this can't happen. And there's no sense for this one to work. Why send all this over here if the traffic accident is down the freeway? Then it's going to back up for miles behind the accident. So now Krebs cycle breaks, but no oxygen is needed right here in glycolysis. So what's going to happen if you can't do steps 2 and 3? You're just going to keep going back and break up another glucose, and then break up another glucose, make 2 ATP, make 2 ATP, keep this going, keep this going. It's going to pile up pyruvate that will be taken care of later if you breathe. And then once you breathe, this pyruvate, which gets turned into lactic acid to keep glycolysis going, it's our fail-safe backup mechanism. If there's a fire, if there's danger, you're going to run and not worry about stopping and catching your breath. That's what lactic acid fermentation is in humans. So right here, it's showing a muscle guy working out without really breathing, and it's going to take that pyruvic acid that we saw coming out of glycolysis and change it into lactic acid so that it could reset that electron carrier to get more electrons out of another glucose. Suffice it to say, it allows us to keep making 2 ATP until oxygen is present, and then it can go to step 2 and then 3 and make a total of 36 ATP. But without oxygen, you can only do glycolysis, and that's what fermentation is. If you are a bacteria or a yeast cell, you don't make pyruvic acid. You are going to, lactic acid, you are going to take the pyruvic acid and make alcohol and carbon dioxide as your byproduct. That's what it showed right there. If you are a yeast or a bacteria cell, you make alcohol and carbon dioxide. So we put that to use by making bread, by making cheese, by making alcohols, and only bacteria and yeast do that. Animals go through lactic acid fermentation. So it's got some pictures of showing how that works. The goal is to reset the electron carriers. Remember, these were carrying electrons. In order to make glycolysis happen again, you have to kick the passenger out of the car. Imagine you're a taxi car and all lanes of the freeway going to LAX are blocked. You're going to go, hey, dude, I can't take you there. You got to get out. So the passenger gets out, and then this goes back to glycolysis. Glucose gets split up again. You grab 2 more passengers to hopefully get those to LAX, which is the Electron Transport Chain. All right, I practiced it. Can you go through and practice by talking over the pictures and using Chapter 6 for additional help if you would like to see more videos, see more explanations, a little interactive diagrams here and there that can help you understand your script a little bit better. There you go. Take care, everybody.